This is 1998, Steven Spielberg's masterpiece, Saving Private Ryan.
It is absolutely that. It is a masterpiece. I think this is certainly Spielberg's best film, in my opinion. It is so well done, so well thought out. It is a labor of love. It is hard to put into words just how poignant and just how well done. I mean, the first 30, 45 minutes of the beach scene alone is absolutely stunning. I mean, so much so that like he was getting, soldiers who landed at the beaches at Normandy saying, "You really captured it," and some people had to walk out because they were like, "Nope, this is bringing back too many memories." And to kind of do it that justice and to do it right. And we've talked about it. We don't really like shaky cam very much, and this is not true shaky cam, but it's definitely a lot of handheld, especially in the beach scene. But it feels right. It doesn't feel like it's shaky cam to kind of hide mess ups or to hide what's really going on. It's shaky cam because it makes you want to feel like you're in the moment. But so much of this is talked about is that beach scene, but everything after is such a great commentary on war and dealing with that process and kind of what makes people heroic, what makes, good choices, missions, bad missions, those kind of things. I don't even really know how to explain it. It is just, it's absolutely one of my favorite films of all time. And not in like, this makes me a happy camper. It's just so well done. So incredible and moving that I just have to step away and just think about it for after I've watched it. Like I can't do much. I'm like,
yeah. And you mentioned the veterans walking out, and I distinctly recall my first viewing with my father and 2 vets walked out during the beach landings. It was just too raw, too close to home. And you're really the only thing I've ever heard with the beach sequence that breaks with historical accuracy is the pillboxes being high up on that was true of another beach, but that wasn't true of Omaha. Like they were even more vicious at Omaha because they were like sideways in the dune, and you would come up beside them and they would fire on you. So it was the same carnage, but that sequence has never been equaled. Probably never will be. No one had ever attempted to do that. I don't think anybody thought it was possible to pull off that level of realism. And yeah, you mentioned the handheld. It's a credit to Spielberg because he studied extensively war footage from the period, and so he matched it. Even matched a lot of the framing that you see in war correspondent footage during the Second World War. Another director that does this in a comedy, oddly enough, but in Dr. Strangelove, Kubrick, when the guys attacked the Air Force Base, it's shot with handheld, and it looks like it's black and white, and so it actually does look like war footage. So, yeah, Spielberg does his research better than anybody. And if you've seen his semi-autobiographical film, The Fabelmans, he'd had it in his heart to do a Second World War picture since he was an early teenager. Mm. Yeah. And then this culminates. This thing just is so groundbreaking, not just for the battle sequence, but it kicks off. I mean, there would be no Band of Brothers if there's no Saving Private Ryan, which, I've told you, Band of Brothers is like my favorite thing ever. And so that doesn't exist. We don't get the Pacific. A whole host of modern war, anti-war films this ushered in. I don't think Black Hawk Down gets greenlit without Saving Private Ryan, because it was like 4 years later it came out. So this thing is just a pillar of cinema. I think it's kind of taken for granted sometimes, to be honest, how good it is.
I mean, and also for the fact of everything that it kind of really did for sound design, for camera work, like you said, for how they kind of bleached out the film. I mean, I remember this was right at the age of like when surround sound really was becoming a little bit more mainstream. It was a little bit more, it was cheaper. So the common user could actually go out and purchase some surround sound. I remember like went to my cousin's house, and the first thing he had a widescreen TV. We watched the thing in letterbox format on his, and it was a CRT widescreen. So it wasn't like an LCD. Like it was the big cathode ray tube back. That thing was heavy as mess to move, and I had to move it a couple times.
Great picture.
It was absolutely gorgeous. But he had gotten surround sound, and we got to play the DTS, track, and it sounded amazing. Like I was blown away that you could reproduce that kind of quality sound in your home theater. And this was the movie that really did it. I mean, I remember many times, showing this movie off of like, hey, listen to this. This sounds absolutely fantastic. Like this is the go-to. The beach scene this is where we're going to get it. But there's so much done in that beach scene too. I mean, when you're following along Tom Hanks' character, like where it goes silent, kind of like he's just in shock. And it's kind of that oxymoronic phrase of like thundering silence. It's so quiet, but yet so overpowering that it's just great decisions on how to do this.
Yeah. And they basically simulate your eardrums pretty much getting blown. And it's overwhelming. The whole film's pretty overwhelming. It does do a nice job of kind of calming you down following it's very somber after the beach scene's conclusion, but then they ramp you back up to some other combat action, and then it culminates in that epic final kind of World War II urban warfare battle that was shot much like a Nolan film would be now, because they had that whole city block, or multiple city blocks built out in England, all shelled out and bombed out, and they just had free run to shoot it any way they wanted to. I think I recall recently Matt Damon, he referenced Private Ryan when he was talking about Oppenheimer, because when they went to the set that they built for Los Alamos in Oppenheimer, he's like, this reminded me of when we shot Saving Private Ryan with Spielberg, because Spielberg did the same thing. He had this whole thing built, and then they had the flexibility to just
do whatever. Yeah.
Oh, I want troops coming from that direction. Well, cool, we can. It's another bombed out building or bombed out house. So
yeah,
it's magnificent. You want to get into the cast if we can?
Oh, the cast is amazing. So it's a lot of now kind of who's who, but at the time it was actually very little who's who. I mean, obviously you have Tom Hanks, big well-known actor, does well. Tom Sizemore was also pretty
he'd done Heat
decent
already.
At that. Yeah, he'd done Heat. He'd done a couple of stuff, but I mean, you've got Eddie Burns, you got Barry Pepper, you got Giovanni Ribisi, you got all these guys who have done things but aren't huge. And fun fact, so. I had read an article that was talking about when Spielberg cast Matt Damon, he was looking for a no-name, all-American looking actor. And so he casted Matt Damon. Didn't realize that, hey, in 97, he's going to, win Best Picture for Good Will Hunting and become this huge star. And now he's, in 98, he's got Matt Damon, in his movie. So,
Edward Norton had turned it down. I think it was American History X. He was the first choice, actually, for Ryan. Was Norton. Mm-hmm. And then Vin Diesel, he got cast. So the way Spielberg works is he doesn't rarely will he have anybody audition. He sees you in another work, and then he casts you based on that work. So he had seen Vin Diesel in like an independent short film, I think that Vin had directed himself. Kind of, I believe it was about being like biracial, and he wrote it and starred in it, and Spielberg just watches everything. Like he's kind of like Tarantino, like he just watches all sorts of stuff. And so he casts Vin based on on that. But you're right. You've got these guys that blew up after this movie, like Diesel, Giovanni Ribisi, because didn't they do like Boiler Room or something like that around this time?
So Vin Diesel and Giovanni Ribisi did Boiler Room. I'm pretty sure Barry Pepper, and I think it was Vin, did Knockaround Guys. I know Barry Pepper was in it. I can't remember if Vin Diesel was in it, but it was like they kind of became this kind of grouping. And then Goldberg, I think, was the only one who didn't.
But Goldberg I'd
really
seen in Dazed and Confused, like 5 years earlier. But you're right, now it's like, and then the cameos are excellent.
Are absolutely awesome. I mean, when you got Ted Danson in for 5 seconds, you know,
and then like Giamatti, like just complaining about his feet.
I mean, and at the time, like, you don't realize that's Paul Giamatti. Like, it took me until like, many years later when I went back and watched it to go, wait, is that Paul Giamatti's in this? Like, I had no idea, because obviously at the time he was not nothing, but he was not a big name. He hadn't done anything. No. So
the late Dennis Farina has got a nice cameo in the beginning, as Hanks' commander. And then the other one that I did want to mention. Okay, so this Max Martini that plays Henderson, he's had a nice career in television, but he got typecast. He's done a couple other war movies, and then he was in like this TV show on CBS called The Unit.
Oh,
about Delta Force. So he basically is kind of typecast playing military, but he does it so well. He's really good. He's kind of that red-haired guy. He asks Goldberg's chewing the gum. And he's like, "You got any more of that?" And he just pulls it out, just drinks it, just starts chewing on it. Yeah. There's great moments like that that just give this movie its authentic feel of like, yeah, these guys are in combat. Like, yeah, the guy's just going to share his same gum. So what? They might not live another 2 minutes, which ironically enough, they don't. They don't.
But going back, like you joke about the guy being typecast, like he's done a lot. Like he's worked a lot. He's made a living being an actor, right?
Absolutely,
so, very jealous of that.
Yeah.
Like, I'd be okay being typecast for that.
For sure. Talking about scenes, I think Burns might get the greatest monologue in the entire movie. Talking about that woman pouring out of her corset before he left for boot camp. Like, if you're scared,
delivers
over there,
it so well. Think of these.
Yeah, but that I love that scene where they've got that playing on the record player. And there's this beautiful sweeping like dolly in on them sitting on those steps. It's just, it's that nice moment of levity before things get really, really bad again.
Well, we kind of talked about it when we watched Generation Kill and chatted about that, of how it's, in between, it's a lot of downtime in between a lot of moments of absolute utter terror. And you just kind of have to deal with it. And that sometimes it feels normal to kind of be in, you're listening to music, you're talking about taking a crap, or talking about, the ladies you saw before you went off to war, those kind of conversations. And all of a sudden, oh, hey, it's time to, go to work.
Yeah.
And, then it's abject terror for however long.
Just to add to the list of like great actors that are in this. I mean, in the beginning is a small scene, but he's in it with Bryan Cranston. He's with the head guy saying, "Oh, yeah, holy smokes, these guys are all brothers." So he's in it. And then you got the, the nice cameo by the military advisor, Mr. Dale Dye. Yeah, Dale Dye's awesome. Yeah.
He's great.
And they put everybody through boot camp except for Damon.
Yep.
And they all hated his guts because he was the only one. See, Spielberg's brilliant. Like,
yeah,
that is part of Spielberg's practical brilliance, is to have the foresight of, how do I create some angst between these actors? And everything I've heard was like a miserable week. I mean, just cold and like wet because they're in England, and it was nasty, muddy. And yeah, Damon didn't have to do it.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's just brilliant to then kind of build that in there. Because I mean, a lot of them, like in Black Hawk Down, they do this training. They go to like boot camp. You know, for a lot of these war film movies that they've done, they've started to do that so they can kind of get an idea, you know, a very small, short idea of what it is to be, you know, a soldier or ranger or Marine, to kind of, you know, build some of that cohesive unitness already, but then also to kind of get them to get comfortable with what either they're using or what they're saying, those kind of things. So,
yeah, I mean, the training was good because everybody moves pretty well. Everybody carries their weapon correctly.
Yeah.
This is a movie that would have been really easy to pick apart by the veteran community, and it's not. It's celebrated because you had a detail-oriented guy on set, both between Spielberg and Dye and the rest of the advisors. It's pitch perfect. Like, it really is. I did want to mention the cinematography. So we celebrate laud Roger Deakins on this podcast, but really before Deakins was working, but before he kind of got more of his notoriety, the it guy was the guy that's DP of this movie, which is Janusz Kamiński, which has been with Spielberg since at least Schindler's List. Multiple Academy Award winner as a DP, and you can see why in this movie. And it just he's kind of a purist. They still shoot film because Spielberg believes in still shooting film, and I think Kamiński does too. Like, he's not interested in shooting any digital. And this is peak filmmaking on actual film. I did want to mention, I've brought it up before on the podcast, but I did want to mention like the different way this movie looks from the way it looked in theaters, and then the way what the VHS did to it and DVD, and then the way it looks now on Blu-ray. So a lot of people saw it in theaters, and it had a very distinct look, this bleach bypass, but everybody thinks it was like super green, and it wasn't. It was green on the VHS and the DVD because there's fewer colors, and there is a lot of green in the uniforms and stuff. And so everybody had in their mind that this was this super like washed out green kind of cast. It's not, because if you go to the Blu-ray, which is based on the original film scans, the skin tones are back to looking like regular skin. It still has that sort of desatched look about it, but it's like, wait, I guess I got comfortable watching VHS and DVD. So you think this is a perfect film? Or darn close?
It's darn close. I can't think of flaws in it as well. I think also some of it is probably that this movie blew me away, that I also kind of pave over some of those flaws. So I can't really think of anything. And also, like, you and I have watched this so many times. I mean, we have hand motions that we use all the time to each other from the stinking movie. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do that to my father randomly too when we're in a public place. Tiger tanks, two of them, Panzer tanks, two of them. Yeah. It's a thing. It's a thing. We're obsessive about it, but
yeah.
The only complaint I've ever heard was from an actual, and this wasn't in person, but from an actual Army Ranger that did take umbrage with Hanks's last line of "earn this." That a Ranger would never say that to another soldier. Like, it just isn't. It's not part of the Ranger doctrine and Ranger creed. But it's a movie.
Yeah,
it's a movie, and it's kind of an important
effect.
Narrative point that this guy, as an old man's been carrying with him his entire life of like this debt, basically.
Talking about that, so were you surprised who the old man was? Like, so were you like everybody? Yeah,
I was actually getting ready to mention that I'm always thought that was one of the slickest moves in the whole movie, was convincing you that the old man is Hanks.
Tom.
Like, it just, and I'm sure that doesn't have 100% rate of success amongst audiences. I'm sure there are people that caught it earlier, like, no, that's somebody else. But yeah, that always got me. I was like,
Yeah. I was also one of those. I was very surprised and kind of at the end was like, oh wait, I thought he was the guy. He doesn't survive. But I had it in my head. It was one of those. There's a term for it that where we all collectively remember something or misquote things.
Mandela effect.
Like, yeah, thank you. The Mandela effect, where it's basically we all go, the Luke, I am your father, which was never ever said in Empire. But for me, I always felt like in the beginning, it's they go in close on his face and then it switches to Tom Hanks's face when he's in the boat, but it doesn't. It doesn't. The next shot is the actual beach with the those iron things in the sand, and it doesn't actually go to his face for like another like minute or two.
Right.
But like I have it in my mind that it's just this quick snap cut. But again, some of the brilliance of Spielberg to even though there's 90 seconds to 2 minutes in between those two shots to connect. Well, I think that's probably too long, but connect to those two moments in your brain. They go, these are the same person.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's like, what I did want to mention is I don't know that anybody does like gunplay better than, at least in a combat scenario. I mean, the heat shootout is impressive, but as far as like combat arms, it seems like nobody does this better than Spielberg, because he has a commitment to using, much like Michael Mann, I think he has a commitment to using authentic sound design for all the weapons they use. And I do have it on good authority, and I'm not gonna give out my source, but Spielberg is an avid gun collector, has a massive private collection of mostly military weaponry, like extensive. I know this for a fact. So he would have a commitment for these things sounding right. But then the other thing is, if you watch Saving Private Ryan and then watch another Spielberg film that's got incredible like gun sequences, Munich, the bullet hits are like nobody else does those the way a Spielberg movie does, because you'll get the front impact and then they have a brutal rear exit squib, and he usually shoots in such a way that you can see them get shot front, and it's just brutal, and fabric flies and dirt and blood, and it's brutal. It's brutal. I don't think anybody shoots those sequences like he does, where these M1 Garand and these Car 98s, these are big rounds that they're firing at each other in World War II, and the exit wound is massive. I mean, it's like getting shot by a 30-06. And so, yeah, Spielberg's commitment to realism is kind of second to none. The only other director I can think of that you'd get this kind of result is if like Christopher Nolan decided to make something where he actually, but Dunkirk wasn't shot like that. So you never really had that kind of a visual.
There's so much, going back to the beach scene, there's so much going on in that scene that I feel like I see something new every time I watch it. Like, people talk a lot about like the medic scene where he gets shot in the water, the canteen, and just water just comes out, and then after a few seconds, then it's actually blood, and he just doesn't notice. And it's like those little small moments that just make that scene so brutal. Absolutely so brutal.
Something kind of surprising with the beach sequence, the color correction is not, like, even on the Blu-ray, is not obsessed with making shots match each other perfectly. Like, I noticed that the most recent viewing, because I was kind of paying attention to that thing, and I think I've mentioned on the podcast that I've got a background some in color correction, mainly in independent movies and stuff. But they weren't, even for the Blu-ray master, they weren't obsessed with making it all like super dialed in shot to shot, because it ultimately doesn't matter. The whole thing's so chaotic and frenetic. I mean, and it's not that the shots are messed up. It's just orchestration of that many extras, that kind of scale. And that's what blows me away with that opening sequence is you get some absolutely massive wide shots and you can't see the edges of the world. It's like in your mind, it's like, oh yeah, this goes for miles.
For miles. Yep.
To the left and the right. This stuff's going on for miles and miles and miles. It's just, it's one of the most powerful scenes in cinema.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it was around like $11 million just for the beach scene alone. And like the whole budget was like $70 million. So you're talking a little over a seventh of your budget was just to do that scene.
And even adjusted for inflation, this isn't as an expensive a movie as you would think it would be. It maybe 150.
Yeah. Because I looked it up, but $11 million is about $21 million, something along those lines.
So it's about double.
Yeah, you think about double.
140.
Yeah.
Man, yeah. I can't imagine anybody making this movie today for 140. That easily would balloon to like 200.
Mm. Yeah.
And then they'd CGI a bunch of nonsense into it too, which now the only thing that is added later is the tracer rounds.
Okay.
The tracers are all, there's some stuff visually added after the fact to accentuate. But not much. I mean, it's not like when they use the flamethrowers and that fireball, that's probably diesel and gasoline getting blown up out of the pillbox. Now, have you read the kind of the inside information? Because I didn't know this when I first watched it. Those two guys that are German army that are surrendering and they shoot them. What they're actually saying is that they're like conscripts from like
from Czech. Yeah. So from the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, I guess at the time.
Yep.
Or something along those lines. Which
who knows it's a cool kind of sub layer anecdote. Now, who knows whether the character's just like even telling the truth. What did he say? I washed for supper. It's so brutal.
Just talking about how we become monsters in war, This did not usher in the anti-war film, but this feels like maybe the pinnacle of it. Because I feel like the anti-war stuff started getting ushered in with like Apocalypse Now and The Deer Hunter. Yeah. I mean, you had a lot of that in response to like Vietnam.
Yeah, they are. They're Vietnam films.
I feel like this is not trying to make, it's not like the 50s and the 40s heroicness of the World War II.
Oh yeah, watch
movies.
Watch The Longest Day. It's like a glorification. Like it's good film. Don't get me wrong. It's just different.
I think it's good. This meets definitely in the middle of the glorification and the anti-war. Like maybe leans a little more anti-war than anything, but it's almost kind of like, here's the good and the bad, like more.
Yeah, but this is different though, right? Because this doesn't work as like something on the futility of war because of what the Second World War was. Mm-hmm. We did an episode on the First World War picture.
Yes,
and
we did.
That's futility of war. That's because the First World War was futile. Second World War was very different. It's just a different conflict, much more like lines drawn in the sand, a little bit more of a moral compass or a lot more moral compass operating on fighting it. And so this movie like respects that, but it also does show you like the classic depravity of war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I think it's balanced in its approach. And I know we've gotten into not really a debate, but a discussion like this movie versus, and we won't do that, but like this movie versus something like The Thin Red Line, and they're just diametrically different films.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. I would take this over Thin Red Line. I mean, I do really enjoy Thin Red Line, but it
depends what mood I'm in, because Thin Red Line is so philosophical in its approach, and there's times when I'm absolutely in the mood for that. And
you also like Terrence Malick a lot more than I
love
do.
Terrence Malick. but
yeah, and
he is an acquired taste.
He's very much an
any director
taste,
that's like every other shot gonna point the camera up into the trees and let the light shine through and just get you to think about the universe and your own life. Yeah, that's an acquired taste. And Saving Private Ryan probably thankfully does not do this.
Does not do that.
Yeah, it's much more in the present moment, focusing on this group of guys in their humanity, their backgrounds, their interactions. I love that line where, they all tell stories. Damon tells his story about his brother and that girl they had up in the barn. And then he's like, will you tell me about your wife and those rose bushes? And he's like, no, that one's for me. Yeah. I was like, oh, that's good writing.
Yes, absolutely.
So in line with the character.
And his big speech where he's telling him kind of what he did when he was, not a captain was supposed to be actually a lot longer. And Tom Hanks went to like Spielberg and was like, no, the character wouldn't do this. And so they like cut a ton out of it. He's like, he would not talk this much. He would not reveal this much about himself. So
that's a tremendous moment. Yeah. When they're all,
it is.
They're all fighting about letting that guy go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About either killing him or
and then
let him go.
And then, one of them's about to kill the other. I forget. I think it's Sizemore is like about ready to put a cap into Burns.
Yeah.
And then Miller's like, I'm a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Man,
something else.
It's powerful.
I almost get choked up thinking about it. It's a very, very emotionally charged film. And it's like, if people think that I watched that movie for some sort of like machismo, like, that's not what draws me back to Private Ryan. It's more than that. It's like, it's a film on what real bravery looks like and kind of being pushed past your limits and moral questions and cowardice. And, it's like, and it honors the greatest generation as well as anything. And that group of guys, I wish I'd known him better, but I was fortunate enough. My grandfather served after, he was too young. He served after World War II, but I had another guy that, he unfortunately passed away when I was like 7 or 8, family friend. And his name was, Bob Huffman, and Bob was about 5'7", and I bet when he was in weighed like $140 or something. And Bob landed at Normandy and fought through Normandy and fought through the rest of Europe and fought and survived the Battle of the Bulge. He was in Patton's. Wow. He was under Patton. Like he knew General Patton. My dad has more stories. I think he only told those stories once, but just a gentle soul that had been through all that. And then unfortunately like passed away of cancer in like, I think 88 or 89, but that generation was something else. And you talk about rising to the occasion. And so I love that a piece of cinema like exists that at least gives some meager inkling window into those circumstances. And this is the best of them, I think. I think you're right.
Yeah. This is my top war film because of that kind of depth that it has.
Yeah.
He just lets it like this is what it is. Here it is.